So the second session today, the session we're about to start now is going to be looking at sustainability, resilience, and digital transformation. So harnessing the power of space to look at how space can help address some of Europe's key political priorities, broader key political priorities. So we have another very interesting and expert panel with us today. And to introduce these and to tell us more about the session, I'd like to now pass to our moderator. That's Jeremy Wilks from Euronews, who's going to moderate the session. Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Hello, everybody. My name's Jeremy Wilks from Euronews, and I used to cover an awful lot of space news. And somebody was just asking me what got me into space, and I think it was probably planetary science, actually, and cosmology, which we won't be talking about on this panel, unfortunately. But fascinating things, and I love talking about space and covering it in my work at Euronews. I also make a program about climate change called Climate Now, and I'm making a podcast about the oceans at the moment as well, and discovering a lot of interesting things doing that. But today, we have got actually quite a complex panel, actually, because we've got guests joining remotely. We've got some pre-recorded content as well as the panel that we've got here. We're going to hear from industry. And I really hope that you will send us your questions. I've got an iPad here with a Google Doc on it. And if you send us a good question, it will turn up on that. And then I'll be able to put it to our panel. And please carry on doing that. And I'm going to hopefully throw it out to the audience really quite early into this discussion, because I think there's a lot of people who want to ask specific questions. We know this is an audience of experts who'll be talking to experts. So please just go for it. It's really nice to hear what you've got to say. So we are talking about sustainability, resilience, and the digital transformation, and harnessing the power of space to address key EU political priorities. And we have a couple of guests joining remotely, as I say, one live, one pre-recorded, and I believe that I can hand over to our live guest, Dan Chirondajan. Hi, Dan. Nice to see you from the Joint Research Centre there in Italy. How's the weather? Always have to ask that if you're British. Hope it's nice.
Yes, it's better. It's better.
Can't hear you.
Okay, can I start?
All right, Dan, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
Okay, many thanks, Jeremy. So good day, ladies and gentlemen from Italy. Where is the GRC Ispra site where I work. It's my honor to start this session with a policy perspective. And more precisely, I will speak about the alignment and the synergies of the space program with the broader political priorities, the European Green Deal and the digitalization, the so-called twin transition, and the promotion of the stronger and more resilient Europe in the world. In order to do this, I will use two examples of initiatives taken by the Commission. The first one is the communication from the Commission to the European Parliament and the Council adopted in June this year about the 2022 Strategic Foresight Report. This is an obligation of the Commission to issue this report annually. This year, the report was focused on twinning the green and digital transitions in the new geopolitical context. As was mentioned by a lot of the speakers before me, the world is experiencing tectonic geopolitical shifts. The previous Strategic Foresight Report identified hyperconnectivity and technological transformation, where I think that we can put also the space, as one of the key megatrends that will impact the EU's open strategic autonomy in the coming decades. The long-term implication of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, including for energy, food, economy, security, defense, and geopolitics, will clearly affect the Europe's path to achieving fair green and digital transition. However, we believe that with the right set of policies, they can serve as a catalyst to speed up achieving them. Based on a thorough analysis, the communication identifies 10 key areas where action will be needed. Due to the short time, I will present only 3 key areas of this. The first one is about strengthening the resilience and open strategic autonomy in critical infrastructure. And here, obviously, we speak about space. For example, today, the EU GNSS program contributes to the strengthening of the resilience of our society and economy, and more precise, the positioning, navigation, and timing essential services on many critical infrastructure sectors, such as energy, transport, telecom, banking, finance. And in order to strengthen them further, GRC worked in close cooperation with DEFIS and has assessed the performance of alternative PNT technologies, positioning, navigation, and timing, that could be used as a backup in case of an outage or malfunction of GNSS. Also, in this context of current and future risk of technological strategic dependencies, the work of the EU Observatory of Critical Technologies for Space, Security and Defense will be very important. And I think that this was mentioned by Evie in her speech at the beginning. The second area is about stepping up the efforts to galvanize the twin transition globally. Roles-based multilateralism and value-based international cooperation should be a priority. Global cooperation, including proactive research and innovative agenda, standardization and norms will be very important to accelerate the development of twinning technologies. And the third key area is about investment. Additional investment should be steered into technologies and infrastructures. And here the EU will need to leverage the additional private and public long-term investment in twinning transition, especially in research and innovation. Synergies between technologies, human capital, infrastructures, and also following the EU taxonomy and the underlying do not significant harm principle. For example, the new EU Secure Connectivity Program that you heard already and will have a separate session is aiming to offer satellite communication services to governments, economy, and civil society should be based on this element. In the same time, this initiative will increase the resilience of communication services, offering an alternative to the terrestrial one. The second example that I would like to give you is about a Commission proposal for a Council recommendation on a coordination approach by the Union to strengthen the resilience of critical infrastructures. Also, you heard about this initiative from Evie and from other speakers. This was adopted last week, very recently, and is based on a 5-point plan presented recently by the Commission President von der Leyen. And these key 5 elements are enhancing preparedness, working with member states with a view to stress test their critical infrastructure, increasing the response capacity, in particular to the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, making good use of satellite capacity to detect potential threats, and last but not least, strengthening cooperation with NATO and key partners in the resilience of critical infrastructure. While all infrastructure should be protected, the first priority is currently with energy, digital, transport, and space. And this is because they have this horizontal characterization. More specific, in order to enhance preparedness and response capabilities, it will be reinforced the cooperation and exchange of information in the context of the Union Civil Protection Mechanism and use of relevant assets, space assets of the Union Space Program. GRC is the entrusted entity for the Copernicus Emergency Services, which, by the way, celebrates its 10th anniversary this year. And since 2012, CHEMS was activated more than 500 times, and not only by European states, but also by United States and Australia. Regarding the stress tests, very important component, the Commission is working together with the new Critical Entities Resilience Group in supporting the development of the common principles to carry out such tests, but also to see what are the common lessons to be learned. These processes should also benefit the resilience of entities operating critical infrastructure against climate and cyber security risks. GRC is contributing to this work in the framework of ERSI, the European Reference Network for Critical Infrastructure Protection. The growing importance of space infrastructure and of space-based services for security-related activities make it essential to ensure their resilience within the EU. There are voiced concern about possible hybrid threats affecting space-based infrastructure. This is why the forthcoming EU space strategy for security and defense will propose appropriate actions to make more structured use of space-based data and services for surveillance and protection of critical infrastructure. GRC also has a long-standing experience in working on security and hybrid threats and their potential impact on the critical infrastructure. Regarding cybersecurity, the Network Information Security Cooperation Group, together with ENISA, will develop a guidance for cybersecurity risk management for operators in the space sector, aiming to increase the resilience of ground-based infrastructure, supporting the provision of space-based services. GRC is collaborating with ENISA and other stakeholders to address the fragmentation of the cybersecurity ecosystem. The Commission will foster also the use of EU surveillance assets, and we spoke about Copernicus and Galileo, supporting member states in the monitoring of critical infrastructure and supporting other surveillance options provided for the Union Space Programme. Better use should be made of abilities offered by the Union Governmental Satellite Communication, GovSatcom, for the monitoring of critical infrastructure and support to crisis response. To conclude, I have two key messages. The first one is that space has a huge potential to address key EU political priorities, the twin transition, grid and digital. Space is an enabler for a lot of policies. And here the Commission is continuously working to create the necessary conditions and maximize this potential. The two examples that I gave you are in this respect. And the second key message is that in the current geopolitical context, space is a must for supporting EUROM in becoming stronger and more resilient in the world. And the forthcoming initiatives, EU Secure Connectivity Programme and EU Space Strategy for Security and Defense, are concrete steps in this direction. So I stop here. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from other distinguished speakers about their views and opinions. Back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Dan. Really nice to hear those messages, and I think everybody here certainly agrees with the idea that space is a must. How does it all actually work and how does it come together? We'll be discussing with our industry speakers here. Dan, you're going to stay on the line and you're going to come back with your comments at the end of this session. Look forward to hearing your feedback there. Now we're handing over to a pre-recorded message from Massimiliano Cellini, MEP.
Dear all, thank you for having given me the chance to intervene to the European Space Forum. I apologize if I could not manage to be physically with you today. Since I started to work in the space field, I have the feeling this sector has a great potential that is still unexplored and not fully exploited by European businesses. We see more and more not traditional players bringing innovative and disruptive solutions, and I will always advocate for a concrete strategy to promote the downstream sector. Since this February, I've been actively involved in the European Commission legislative proposal establishing a Union Secure Connectivity Programme for the period 2023-2027. The objective of this proposal is to establish an EU satellite constellation that ensures the provision of a worldwide secure, flexible and resilient satellite communication services to the European Union and Member States, including mobile and fixed broadband satellite access, satellite network access for B2B services, including internet connection for more remote areas. This new initiative is a sort of third pillar in the space policy, after Galileo for navigation and Copernicus for observation. Today the Commission put on the table satellite communication. The geopolitical situation we are experiencing seems confirming the need to have an EU infrastructure that provides secure communication. As a matter of fact, the aggression to Ukraine underline the weaknesses of the European Union and its lack of the infrastructure to ensure the secure connectivity. In a geopolitical context where tensions are arising, it is important for our Union to be equipped with the right instrument in order to ensure its open strategic autonomy. At the same time, EU should continue to prove its ability to compete worldwide in the space sector at technological level. The Commission proposal points out that the EU infrastructure is mainly made of GEO satellites, which are not the most suitable to reply to new governmental users' needs. Consequently, more investment in new assets, MEO and LEO, while also taking into account new threats posed by quantum technologies, which are able to decrypt content that is currently encrypted. My priorities and the EPP priorities on this important file have all been included on the text that has been recently voted in ITER committee. The negotiated text nowadays ensures a secure and strong role for SMEs by stressing the need to involve the whole space ecosystem. I believe we have also managed to build in safeguard to avoid distortions of the existing space market in the awards of contracts and to apply a transparent pricing policy in case of shortage and of capacities. Furthermore, we have established a clearer distinguishing between governmental services, private services, and governmental services provided by private sector to assure a real competition. On the budget, I believe that if we want to be successful and ambitious, budget is a key if we want our union to be competitive at global level. Since it is a new program not foreseen in the MFF 2021-2027, priority should be given to unallocated margins under the MFF ceilings or mobilized through the non-thematic MFF special instruments in order to limit cut to other union programs. In order to promote and ensure EU strategic autonomy and the competitiveness of our industry, Europe should invest in research, innovation, in order to boost European technologies and preserve Europe's leadership, competitiveness, sustainability and autonomy in this strategic domain in the future. In a context where traditional space powers remain very active, the competitiveness of the European space sector being increasingly challenged by new players, disruptive industrial organization and business model frequently supported by national institutional entities. It is with this in mind that I've been working on space policy since I've been appointed as a rapporteur in the space program last term. Indeed, the space program we worked to recognize the important role of the European industry, and support means to develop a strong, competitive and diversified industrial base in Europe. When discussing the regulation during last mandate, we noticed that the potential of the downstream sector was not fully recognized and promoted. Therefore, in the new regulation, we made a clear focus on the downstream sector. The space sector is led by big companies, which bring an incredible added value. However, when it comes to small actors and services linked to the traditional application, a clear gap exists. The new space program addresses this issue by promoting the widest and most open participation possible of start-up, new entrant, and small and medium-sized enterprises and other economic operators in the upstream as well as in the downstream market throughout the supply chain in the application and services sector. As last remark, I believe it is important to stress that the Union needs a single approach when it comes to space. 1.5 years ago, the Union Space Programme was entering into force as a comprehensive law for the EU space sector. In order to guarantee the consistency between the different space components, but also to harmonize as much as possible the governance of the Union space policy, in the future this initiative should be part of the Union Space Programme. The space sector is a strategic sector that generates business value and jobs. Investing in this sector and in the link between this sector and the defense sector is a priority for prosperity and security in the European Union. It is with this in mind that policymakers should approach these topics nowadays. I thank you all for your attention to this space and defense sector and wish you all a good continuation of the activities and of this interesting forum.
No, thanks to Massimiliano Cellini, MEP, for that message. And now it's time to hand over to our panelists, who all have the chance to make a bit of an opening statement before I start firing them with questions, hopefully from the audience. Please start sending them in. And they'll, as I say, turn up on my iPad here. I'll introduce them. So on my left, we have Koen Williams, who's the Head of International Government Markets and Strategy at ST Engineering iDirect Europe. Next to him is Jean-Hubert Lenotte, who's the Chief Strategy and Resources Officer at Eutelsat. And next to him, Severin Meister, the CEO of Rivada Space Networks. And right on the end, we have Johan Bernard, who's the Public Policy Director for EU Digital at Amazon. Let's hand over to you, Koen. Ground segment is where you are, it's where you're active. Just tell us your opening thoughts.
Yeah, well, I hope this is on.
I'm not sure it is, actually.
Is it on? Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Okay. Well, I brought a couple of slides to divert your eyes away from me towards to look at something more pretty. And the idea indeed was to talk about the new ground concept. We've been talking a lot about space. We've been looking upwards. And definitely there's a lot of things happening up there. So we all recognize that. We all seen the programs. We all seen the constellations. But there is a couple of elements that we need to be very wary about. It's not only about the satellites. It's certainly also about services. We want to bring obviously broadband services, secure services to end users. And we want to pass on the best SLAs as possible. But again, there is a component missing. And that component I didn't hear addressed this morning. In fact, it's the component of the end user. Right? And that's where we look at mainly. It's from an end user perspective and being very close to the end user, what the actual needs are from the end user, saying, okay, when we're in an operation, when there is a disaster, what do we exactly need? And the touch point was resiliency as part of the panel. And obviously the end user wants resiliency when he is in operation, or she. Obviously, when one satellite constellation is down, they want to switch to another one. So there needs to be a layered approach. So there needs to be a fabric of satellite constellations working together. So it's not only about my constellation here, my constellation there. It's also about the possibility to switch in between constellations and create resiliency and network diversity. So do not only think in terms of policy, of autonomy, etc. Also think in terms of end user and of usage. And that's exactly what we're doing from a new ground perspective. So new ground, of course, it's a bit related to new space, but where we are looking at everything that's happening on the ground. Basically, the ground segment is the heart and the brains of the system, right? Don't forget that when there is a system launch, you also need to consider the ground segment, and certainly from as early as possible, because a lot of innovation is also happening on the ground. When you talk about bringing networks together, when you think about hybrid networks, because the end user also wants hybrid networks, they want to have handhelds, they want to have terminals that can switch between a terrestrial network and a satellite network. When there is a disaster, for example, they want to have the choice to have the best way and the best routing of their communication. So that's something that you need to think of. You need to think of a architecture. So a lot of people talk about 5G when they think about the waveform and by their cell phone. No, we also think about the architecture to make an interoperable architecture between systems, between terrestrial, between satellite. So we don't look at the niche only of the satellite part. We also look broad into the broader telecom capabilities. And then, of course, we look further on orchestrating services, on bringing good services and secure services towards our customer base or the European customer base. And talking about security, obviously, there's also other initiatives that have been launched, such as the European Protected Waveform, where we're the proud consortium leader, and that will deliver secure connectivity towards the USC, so towards the new constellation, but also towards other end users, primarily military end users. So that brings you extra resiliency. So you have network diversity, you have the cyber element, and then you've got everything on top of that to make sure that your traffic is not interrupted or is not intercepted. So there is an LPD, LPI type of, sorry for the acronym, but that's the way of thinking about that concept. The key word here on this slide is convergence. So the systems are coming closer together. Space segment, ground segment, user segments, service layer, it's all coming together into one big system. And that system needs to be interoperable, right? And that's the key message, of course, that we want to convey here without forgetting the security layer. That's it.
Very interesting. We'll come back to you on some of those points. Let me hand over now to Jean-Hubert from Eutelsat.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here and see quite a few familiar faces. And since we are all experts in this domain, I'll try not to state things that you know. But let me just share three main comments as opening remark. The first one is why connectivity matters. And maybe as a first comment, before joining satellites 8 years ago, I was in the broader TMT sector, telecom, media, high tech. And I think that satellite is one of the few domains where Europe still has a leading role today in technology. There are other technologies where we have, as a matter of fact, lost ground. Satellite is not one of them, so we can be very happy about that. And I'm very happy to see indeed all this energy, but as well the willingness to invest in this sector, which is indeed critical. So why, more specifically, why is connectivity critical? Three elements here. One is the sheer size of the sector and what's happening with LEO constellations in particular. There are many estimates of the size, what will be the size of the sector, how attractive it will be. Euroconsult thinks it's going to be a 16 billion market by 2030. This is more than 3 times the size of today. There are much more bullish estimates when you think that, of course, 2 very large players invest a lot, 2 very large new entrants invest a lot in this domain. So it will be a critical high growth market, very important, attractive opportunity. And it's going to be the case not only until 2030 with the usages that we know today, which is essentially connecting boats, planes, and as well people on the wrong side of the digital divide. But it's going to be as well beyond that, creating new needs. Let me take 2 examples. One are the connected cars. With more autonomy in the cars, we'll need to entertain passengers. And that will be in many places can be done only through satellite. So at least a satellite as a complementary infrastructure to do that. I think there's no, again, coincidence that Mr. Musk invests here. The second example is connectivity for boats, planes to optimize the usage of energy. This is we have at Eutelsat one new investor. This is public, CMA CGM, who is a big merchant shipping company. And one of the key reasons to invest is indeed that he sees the opportunity to actually create value in his own domain through satellite in the future, because indeed driving boats to optimize energy will require a lot of data, and will actually save a lot of money for them. So it's a very important domain, and that's not only until 2030, but that's well beyond. The second reason why this is important is that, and we'll come back to that, we see only a few players that can play in the domain, at least of LEO constellation. This is simply because of the usage of a shared spectrum. Spectrum is a rare asset. We see two players, essentially two players in KU, likely two players in KA, but basically on a global basis, only 4 players on the big commercial bands to play in that domain. So this is why it's critical as well. And the third remark on the criticality is specifically that we have some changes in our value chain with the big new entrants that I mentioned. Of course, I mentioned Musk, but could mention as well Amazon. And not only do they bring significant, I mean, huge ability to invest in the sector, which is good news, but they are as well disrupting the value chain. They are building their own satellites, their own launchers. And there is, we all have to have that in mind. Of course, my friends from Airbus and TAS do have it, which is in fact a big part of the new satellites, the future satellites of connectivity, may not be built by them, but directly by those big integrated players. So connectivity is very important. The second message is precisely about Eutelsat. Eutelsat has announced in the summer the acquisition of OneWeb, which is, of course, not closed as we speak, but which is under all the regulatory processes. This is extremely important for us because precisely we do want to be in the connectivity market for the reasons that I mentioned before. It's such an attractive market, and OneWeb is just a unique opportunity to get there. Why? Because OneWeb is one of the only 2 players today that has a constellation starting to be in service with Starlink. It's one of the 2. It will be one of the 2 for quite a while. We'll hear more from Amazon. So if we have some news about the timing from Amazon, but I do believe that Amazon will not be there for quite a while. And beyond us 3, I don't see that there is any project at a level of advancement that will create a constellation before likely close to the end of the decade. So for quite a while, we'll be the only one, and this is why OneWeb, which has satellite built by Airbus, mostly launched by Arianespace, is actually a critical asset for us. And building on what you said, Koen, customers are wanting this. So they are wanting what? They are wanting the combination of GEO and LEO. This is even beyond what we expected. So since we have announced this deal, so many of our customers in all segments are praising this for the resilience. And because many of our customers are in fact big companies, again, shipping companies, airlines, but as well in many other sectors that want to use both the benefits of LEO for certain critical communications where latency does matter a lot, and the advantages of LEO where you can bring a lot of capacity at a lower cost. So customers want it. And lastly, Eutelsat with the creation of OneWeb will create significant synergies, 1.5 billion, and will be therefore in this space sector, one of the few companies with a real incredibly unique asset and therefore potential success going forward. So that's my second message. And my third message, I promise I'll be short. My third message is that when we think now about the what can be done between Europe and the private sector, in particular us, I see many opportunities. First, we have been supporting of this initiative from Europe to build a sovereign constellation. I think that does make a lot of sense. We see as well with a very positive perspective, the fact that Europe is starting to use commercial satellite as part of their own global strategy that has been done, including for government usages. It has been done for quite a while, as everybody knows, from the US, but I think that it's important to see Europe getting there. And of course, all these projects with as well fuel competition and innovation in Europe. But beyond that, what I want to stress is that between a project like the one from Eutelsat and OneWeb tomorrow, if we get to a close, and Europe, there are in fact significant synergies possible at hand. There are, if you think about the two large constellations, one OneWeb, which is commercially focused, one European, which is essentially governmental focus. Those two constellations, in fact, have many developments in common. So there are synergies in terms of engineering, in terms of launch and access to space. There are synergies in terms of operations, which is not a topic we talk so much about, but the EU constellation will have to be operated. There are synergies because us, and I see colleagues as well from SES and Hispasat, we all have assets on the ground, so teleports to actually operate, so help operate such constellations. And specifically regarding OneWeb, we have synergies as well in terms of spectrum, because OneWeb has not only the best spectrum priority in KU, but as well a broad portfolio of spectrum rights. And this as well can be used for the European project. So in a nutshell, great opportunity in connectivity. The connectivity evolution in space is really big deal for all of us. Eutelsat is extremely well placed, and I have to say proud to be, thanks to our acquisition of OneWeb, a leader and to bring a constellation back to Europe or strongly in Europe through that move. And there are many opportunities, many synergies between European project and Eutelsat and OneWeb. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'll hand over straight over to Severin Master, please.
Thank you very much. I have to say this is a wonderful panel because we're actually doing like a tour d'horizon, and that goes from the ground segment to the old space to the new space. And obviously there is a lot that we can talk about there because it has direct implications to what Europe is doing and what Europe should be doing in that sector. We went from the big constellations to the LEO constellations, and the thing I have to get back to here first is what is Rivada Space Networks? We are a kind of new space company that has luckily one of the highest priority filings, and we will build a constellation with 600 satellites that is very different to the other constellations because we don't employ any gateways and therefore allow user terminals, with which we started, to connect any 2 points on the globe with high speed and low latency, therefore offering a lot of resiliency because you don't need fiber connections. It's cables that nobody can cut in terms if there's a crisis. It offers government connectivity and enterprise connectivity. But also it's a kind of new sector that people don't talk enough about. Especially at this conference. What I really want to come to here is that what makes us especially European, and that is, for one, that Europe has to find its niche within the global space, within the Americans and the Chinese, and we always have to define our niche in there because there are big players in the market, and we have to kind of find where can we settle and where can we show our strengths, and that is particularly for in the enterprise services. We've got OneWeb and we've got Starlink that we already talked about that offer customer services. And here we think that we should go into services that help small and medium-sized enterprises, that help governments, and that connect in a sustainable way. What is sustainability here? We do not just try and check all the boxes that we have there to say, well, we deorbit the satellites, we employ less satellites than others, so there's less congestion up there, but also sustainability means, and that's I think where the real European strength comes in, that we need commercial viability. So we have to have things that take into account our responsibility to not congest anything, but we also need solutions that are commercially viable. And this is where America is a bit ahead of us at the moment, where the Americans made the transformation to the commercialization, where there are a lot of services offered, and that drove down prices dramatically. And especially for the European Union, I think we should get more to this commercial aspect, because that actually makes projects sustainable. If we bring down the prices, if we bring in more competition, and if we as a government don't just hand out subsidies, but also we hand out contracts, the government becomes a customer and is not just a kind of donor to the organization, then that develops the market, and that allows companies to offer competitive services, with which they can then be competitive around the globe and define their niches, and thereby increase the European footprint that we have in that sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me hand over to Johan.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be depicted by Séverin as part of the new space, if I understood well what you just said. So I'm pleased to be here today to maybe start with a few words about Project Kuiper, which is Amazon's satellite constellation. And then also I heard that you have emphasized the consumer, the end consumer, and this is our approach. I will comment briefly on this, and also on how we partner with the EU industry, which is obviously a key to the panel today. So briefly speaking, Project Kuiper is a constellation that includes 3,236 satellites. We have announced it in April. The purpose is to deliver fast and affordable connectivity around the globe, and we will deploy in a few phases. Europe will be part of the first phase of deployment. This is an ambitious project. We have said already that we are investing over $10 billion in this project, and definitely it's about increasing global broadband access for the benefit of customers. So I would like to spend maybe a minute on this, explaining why we believe that this initiative will help end consumers, because at Amazon, this is always our approach. We start from the customer, from the end consumer in this case, and we work backwards. We look at, okay, their needs first, and what we can do to match these needs and to provide valuable services from the customer standpoint. That's what we do in multiple domains. That's also what we do in the space domain. So what we believe is that we can contribute to the digitization of Europe. It has been said by the Commission in their memorandum that was published in February that satellite connectivity is a very indispensable complement to ground-based connections, right? And that in particular allows, in particular, LEO constellations can enable seamless connections to remote places or to places where the network either has been damaged or is no longer trusted, etc. So that's a fact that is well acknowledged already by the EU Commission. Our service will allow to bring more connectivity to households, but also to businesses and also to governmental users by providing secure connectivity options on top of what is already available. This will be in particular very valuable for SMEs to access new services, but also for large enterprise, for example, to connect remote assets, and also for authorities and governmental services to benefit from secure connectivity options on top of what is available. I heard what you said about the need for redundancy. I will comment briefly on that. So that's the purpose. How we get there is through obviously our own investments, but also through partnerships. And I have seen that Ariane Group are here today. We have announced in April a very, I would say, unprecedented agreement with ULA, with Blue Origin, and with Arianespace for 83 heavy lift launches to take place in the next 5 years. So that's probably addressing also your question, Jean-Hubert, partly. 18 of which will be with Arianespace. So that's going to provide, well, a very meaningful activity to your multiple partners across Europe. I read, but I guess you can confirm that Arianespace is actually working, Ariane Group is actually working with, I think 600, if I read well on your website, companies across Europe, 300 plus of which are actually SMEs. And therefore, that's the entire EU industry that will benefit from that partnership beyond Arianespace and Ariane Group. And I think this is a good example of what we can do to cooperate to build the EU space industry based on such cooperation. And beyond that cooperation on the launch side, we will obviously cooperate also with other EU-based companies, especially carriers. Obviously, we will provide backhauling services to carriers to access remote areas, but we also want to build partnerships. We have already announced a partnership with Verizon. There could be more of those in the coming future. So that's the approach. The approach is to leverage on investments and innovation across the space industry, namely in Europe, and specifically in Europe with that major partnership that we have already announced. And that's our approach to this project. So to conclude, maybe I was glad to hear from Director Papantonio that the approach is that of an open strategic autonomy, because I truly believe that this is where we should start from. I mean, there is in the industry, we know that the strength of the space industry in Europe will depend on investment and innovation. And we also know that investment and innovation are global, right? And therefore, leveraging on the investment and innovation capabilities of partners is key. And we need more cooperation. So that's my first message to conclude with. And the second message and the last message will be around resilience, because this is also a word that I heard quite a lot this morning. Resilience in the telecom world depends on redundancy, depends on, you said it, the availability of other connectivity options, so that if one system fails, others can be used. And so to get there, we need more competition. And this is, again, the approach in which we are engaging with Project Kuiper. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Johan. I wanted to come back, in fact, and ask the rest of the panel what they thought, what they made of this use of the term of open strategic autonomy. What does the open part mean? Severin, what's your interpretation of that, and what do you understand from it?
I mean, I think the open part, the really important thing about this is that we have not single systems operating individually, but we have constellations that are interconnected. And as we said before on the ground segment, user terminals that can connect to various constellations and not just to one. And then that comes back to the EU goal of sustainability, because I need less user terminals, but it also creates more resilience because everybody can use various constellations and the traffic can be routed through.
So everything links to everything else. Is that the same view that you've had? That's your understanding?
That is correct. So the advantage is that all technologies or our technology is becoming more software defined. So it means it becomes easier to have a capability to indeed switch from one constellation to another, to go from terrestrial to satellite, etc. So indeed, that gives that openness, that interoperability that already exists partly today, but that's something that we are betting on in future, surely, because that is exactly what's happening. It's already happened in the terrestrial world, where you can freely roam across the different countries with your cell phone. I mean, the same thing should be happening as well with your terminal. and where you've got a terminal that you don't need to drag 20 antennas, 20 modems along when you're in the mission. It is one single terminal that can do that, and that's the whole
Is
philosophy.
the idea of having all of those different kinds of connections the way that you overcome some of the points, some of the quotes from the previous panel? I'm going to come out with some of those now. One of the quotes was, we cannot rely on our friends. I thought that was a pretty heavy one. And another one we had was, we need backups. Can we really afford to rely on Amazon and Starlink?
You should rely on friends. The point is that you always need to have different options, right? And you have categories and levels of options. And of course, you go to your preferred partner. There is, of course, always NATO. You have your NATO partnerships, end users. Typically in MOD, they are part of NATO, part of the EU. So they would maybe use that capability of NATO as well. So there is always a range of options and a level of options that you can go across. And that's, of course, what you can set in your network as what's your preferred option, what's your second preferred, et cetera, et cetera.
Jean-Hubert, can I bring you in on this?
Yes. No, I think you just mentioned in one of the quotes of the last panel, which is let's not rely on Starlink and Amazon. I agree with that. And again, we have some European players, so that's very easy. But back to your question on open versus not open, we do subscribe to the fact that the EU constellation, they should be a sovereign part for what we call core, the hardcore government services, which are probably light in terms of needs for quantity of connectivity, but it's critical that those ones are really indeed completely controlled by the customer and on European soil. Beyond that, I think that the openness should indeed privilege the European operators, including in particular ourselves. And if we talk about LEO constellation, that was again my message. We have a player that has a LEO constellation. This is us, and clearly we are not in the same league. I'm sorry for my colleague on the panel. We are not in the same league as Amazon. We should be very clear that European competition is there in the market. That's great. That's good for the customers. But Europe should actually support their players and should support the European operators. In particular ourselves, to deliver these services.
I mean, you're kind of giving a big up to yourself there on the Europeanness of Eutelsat, which is probably undeniable, but the Europeanness of OneWeb is rather questionable, isn't it? Because the ownership is from the UK government, an Indian multinational. The Japanese have also got a share in it.
So it's maybe the opportunity to actually clarify a few points here. Again, we have acquired this asset. The UK government has special rights, will retain special rights, which are in fact quite limited on OneWeb, but OneWeb will remain a subsidiary of its own. Eutelsat can pursue its own project in terms of constellation, including for the benefit of our customers. And I think that for Europe, this is particularly the case, including for our customers. Within the Eutelsat, I would say, framework and structure. So clearly, Eutelsat, which is a company that handles critical infrastructure in France and all the aspects that are related to that in terms of control and supervision by the French authorities, Eutelsat remains that company and can play a big role. This is why we have certainly strong solutions to offer for the European project. And clearly, we don't see ourselves, and I think this should be obvious to everyone, we don't see ourselves in the same league as Starlink and Amazon in terms of Europeanity. We have been, and we will remain European. And again, as I said, but it's very important to get that, our colleagues here, especially completely the case for Starlink, have a completely vertically integrated model, which is not our case. We'll continue to buy satellites from Airbus and TAS mostly, and so that's quite a difference.
Severin, can I get your reaction on that?
Yes, well, I would say I fully agree that there's not going to be an infinite amount of LEO constellations, but I think there's going to be 5 of them, and 2 of them are going to be probably more American leaning, well, Starlink and Kuiper, obviously. And then there is, if we count OneWeb as European and Rivada, and something that Thales is going to build, I guess, which again shows that Europe is actually leading in the sector. And that's something where I would like to take a small poke at Johan, because what you just explained shows exactly what's great and what's wrong about Europe at the moment. We have the oldest and best capacity to launch satellites into space with Ariane, but then we have Kuiper buying up the whole capacity for 5 years, and then they try and sell the Amazon associated rocket, where he said it's not really Amazon, to those constellations that need something. And so when we want to launch 600 satellites by 2026, we have to go to America, we have to go to SpaceX, because there is no European available that could actually launch the satellites at the moment. And also OneWeb, to a certain degree, has to rely on SpaceX because we don't have the capacity in Europe. And that shows that Europe, on the one hand, is leading and wants to put these things into space, but it has to rely on others. And that's where we have to strengthen our sector.
I did somehow, a half an hour ago, I was thinking this is going to come down to rockets, isn't it? And it did, because it always does.
Always does.
One of the questions we had from the audience, a resilient infrastructure is important for the EU. How does a LEO constellation help to keep communications secure? Anybody got an answer on that one?
Well, there is, of course, the experts are there, but at least what the advantage is that indeed it goes so quickly. You have all these handovers, and you need to be in the spot beam to be able to interfere or to jam, right? And it's difficult if you take out one satellite, you still have to take out another 600 of them. So there is a LEO system by design is already quite resilient. And if you add on other constellations in different orbits, I mean, you've got a service availability that is near to 100.
Johan?
Yeah, I can only echo that. Resilience is an objective for the EU. Redundancy is the name of the game to become resilient. And so if you have multiple assets, then the chances that they could be brought down are simply lower for statistical reasons. So I believe that LEO constellations are by design more reliable. And obviously, if you have several, then you become even more reliable.
Well, another question we had from the audience, and thank you for sending those through, is from Mark Meyer, who's asking how can awareness of the importance of space tech to solve problems on Earth in line with the UN SDGs be further promoted? He's basically talking about STM and orbital debris. I don't know whether you want to come in on orbital debris. It's certainly going to get crowded. And several of you talked about sustainability already to an extent. What's the outlook, do you think, when it comes to that?
Well, there's two aspects to that. One is, of course, with large constellations, when they're interconnected, it's easier to manage them and to also avoid space debris when it crosses your orbit. But of course, there's also another sector to that, and I think that's also one that's currently stronger developed in the US than in Europe. But we have all these new launcher companies, also European ones like ESA Aerospace and others of the small launchers, that will also have rockets that go into space and collect space debris and deorbit space debris for others. And that technology is just evolving right now to the degree that the junk is building up there. So I think it is definitely a big problem, but it's one that we're also going to find solutions for.
Is it going to turn into a pretty exciting business opportunity doing that, actually?
Hopefully, because I think, as I said before, everything that's sustainable needs to be commercially viable, because when it has a huge payroll and nobody wants to pay it. So I think there is going to be a sector there where people have, towing trucks in space that either attach a long aluminum strip to a satellite and that drags it down, or that can, with some kind of rocket, just attach to it and then pull it down. But we need more awareness from the people building satellites to have the attachment hooks so that you can actually connect there.
What's the plan with the Kuiper satellites?
Yeah, maybe a few comments, because obviously we're very committed to sustainability in space. I think space is certainly, and it was said this morning, an enabler for sustainability on the ground, but we have to be committed to sustainability in the space. So how we address this is through several approaches. The first one is in the design of the satellites themselves, to make sure that they do not contribute to this, right? And this is a question of design. The second, let's say, angle is the system design. We have at Kuiper 3 layers that will be relatively close from one another at 490 590, 610, and 630 kilometers that will enable us to avoid overlap with other orbits, right? And therefore limit the risks because of the system design. And there is more, obviously, you need to think from day one about deorbiting, how you will do that. So how we address that question at Kuiper is that we have autonomous propulsion that will allow a proper deorbiting of all our satellites. And finally, obviously, there are operations. This is also something that has been, let's say, briefly commented this morning, but it's important, it's essential even that Ephemerides's data and other data are exchanged during the lifetime of the satellite. So this is also a commitment that we're making.
Can I bring in
just maybe one additional comment? Of course, fully agree with what's been said. I think that as well, there will be a role for Europe and as a big power to ensure through regulation that the high demand on how we manage space debris is indeed implemented. We have there are levers that exist in terms of market access, for instance, in some of our countries. Market access is key for most of our business models, and we must make sure that's one lever. There are other levers, but we must make sure through regulation as well that all the key players in space do indeed follow the right practices, the right rules. We are, of course, fully committed as well, and happy to hear that Amazon is.
What happens if the unthinkable happen and you start having direct attacks on your satellites, though, and we start getting a serious space debris problem? What's the solution? I mean, because we're talking about commercial companies here, who's going to go and clean that up and sort it out?
I think before we, this is a bit, I think, science fiction. I think that
it did happen to a French military
before-
satellite, though. It was targeted by a Russian one.
But before we get there, I think for commercial satellites, the key potential threat is rather on cybersecurity. This is why as well, in fact, what's happening on the ground is critical. This is why inter-satellite link are critical, and indeed this is why LEO constellations are generally more resilient, both in terms of the actual technology resilience of the constellation, but as well the ability to control what's happening on the ground in many places. I think for the rest, this is again, as far as the LEO constellation are concerned, this is for us more science fiction, but we have indeed ways to circumvent this.
I've actually got another question that's come in from you. Thank you, from Ignacio Chichile, who's asking, resiliency and hybrid networks are being mentioned repeatedly. Is OneWeb equipping their satellites with the hardware needed to communicate with other constellations, for instance, with optical links?
Well, more importantly, we are tracking. Of course, we are tracking and openly sharing all the ephemeris of our satellite. So this is the key point, just to make sure to avoid collision. That's the point, and this is essentially what needs to be done, as well as again subscribing to the very strong constraints that exist typically in the French space law, both in terms of precisely tracking those satellites, but as well making sure that at any point of time, those satellites are controllable, remain controllable, and can be brought down to Earth in a safe manner to maintain the security. This is actually what's happening.
Severin,
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, attacks at the moment happen more to those networks that have gateways. That's what we saw in Ukraine, where the gateway on the ground is attacked. But there is a proper commercial solution for space debris, and that is companies that will have rockets or satellites self-propelled in space, and that will offer something like an insurance contract where you make an agreement with them. I have 600 or 1,000 or 2,000 satellites in my constellation, and I pay you a certain sum per year for you having a vehicle in standby that can actually deorbit satellites. Because of course, it often happens that the autonomous engines that the satellites have do not function correctly at the end of life, and then you still have to bring those down. And these are services, and this is going to be a kind of a space insurance economy that's going to develop over the next decade.
That same question that we just had for OneWeb could also be applied to you. Your satellites obviously talk to each other, but will they talk to others?
Yes, I mean, we definitely built them in a way that they can talk to others, because the whole DNA of Rivada is open access, sharing the bandwidth with others, and sharing the network infrastructure with others. So our inter-satellite links will be able to connect to other constellations. And there's also technology that we will not have in the first batch of satellites, but you can have extra satellites that, for example, have extra ground links or extra links to geosatellites, so that you can do a backhaul and take some of the capacity off with an optical link instead of just using the RF downlink.
Certain people would say, though, that at the end of the day, we're going to build fantastic networks on the ground. 5G is coming, and it's going actually pretty fast, according to the 5G insiders that I speak to. Are we going to need all of these satellites?
I think we will, because there's more and more of I mean, just the amount of data that we have in 5G is exploding, and the lower the prices fall, the more demand there's going to be for that capacity. So I think if the price is right, and that's always the question, is do we have one operator that sets a price, and then we bar a lot of people from having access because the price is too high? And that's what's currently in the space segment. That's why we have the Partnering to Connect initiative of the United Nations to bring people on board. As soon as the prices drop, the demand is going to be there to use all those satellites.
But you talk to the telecoms guys, and they'll tell you all about their marvelous 5G network, how you're going to get great smart cities. It's all going to be green and all connected beautifully. They're not necessarily telling me about extra constellations all the time.
But there's no competition in telecoms. It's all oligopolies with a too high price set, and that excludes a lot of the demand from the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can only echo what was said already by Severin, but I think there are, in several ways, there is complementarity between satellite and ground-based communications. First, because we can actually contribute to ground-based communications. That's what we can do when we provide backhauling services to 5G carriers, for example. So that's one way to do that. Secondly, also because there are some remote places or some networks that are damaged. It happened recently, and they can be damaged by all types of causes, or because there is no network, which is the case, for example, at sea, etc. And I think also, and I will echo your last point, that it is critical that there is competition in communication services, not only for pricing reasons, but also for redundancy and therefore resilience reasons. So for all these reasons, I do believe that these LEO constellations are needed.
Jean-Hubert?
Yes, just to add, fully agree to what you say, Johan. To take the big picture, really, the telcos is a much larger market, and since we have constellations, in fact, many telcos are approaching us, are seeing satellite as much more interesting. Why? Because before, one of the reasons why it was not the case is that satellites were in fact bringing really almost insignificant connectivity in terms of size. With LEO constellation, we are nowhere near competition in terms of size of connectivity we can deliver. However, we become competitive in price. We become competitive in performance. So all the barriers to adoption that did exist are removed, and telcos do understand that. That's why, despite 5G, they are increasingly interested and willing to partner with us on many cases.
I said that I thought the conversation would also come down to rockets and availability of rockets. It also comes down to money. And in the previous panel, there was that question: where's the money going to come from to make all of this happen? Is it actually going to come from private money that's coming from companies that are not necessarily located within the EU 27?
Well, I think there is a lot of R&D to be done still, right? And indeed, you need to look at a business case at all instances. And I think everybody here in the room or around the table in the panel is looking at their own business cases and how to be at least profitable. And you need a push in the back, and I think the EU is perfect for that, to support its industry, to give that push in the back, because indeed we're still competing with other nations outside of Europe. And if you look that there's quite a lot of efforts going into space in general by the larger nations, I guess, and they're all funding these programs. And if you want to have a competing advantage against these larger entities from different countries, you also need a push in the back. So, and that's, I guess, is still the role for the EU.
And it was the money, and then it was also speed. Can we go quick? Can we learn to go quick?
Yes, there's money, and those considerations are big investments. So that's actually a high barrier to entry, and very big investments. We think that the market opportunity is pretty worth it, but I think that more importantly, what we really believe is what I said earlier, is that there will be a limited number of players per band. Why? Because as you add players in a band, for the next player, it becomes economically, in fact, technically, in terms of operation, more challenging. Why? Because as I think most of the people here know, you have in fact to leave space and to basically shut down your satellite to avoid interference with somebody that has high priority. Therefore, you need more satellites. And therefore, for the third entrant or the fourth entrant, that's actually very challenging. So the barrier to entry is partly money, of course, but as well that. And so there will be private money. And I agree as well that we need the support from the public sector. We know very well that for SpaceX, it was a key element in their success to have support from many different sources in the US of investment, and we need that type of support in Europe as well, for sure.
I think we really need two things there. And one, the European Union is doing in a very good way with the Secure Communications Initiative. But what we also need is commercial stimulus. And I think that best happens by making offtake agreements. This is something that's used more in the US than in Europe, where the government or the European Union can just say, we are going to buy a certain service once you're up. And I think that applies to every single one of the companies I see up there with their logos, the ones that are more from younger or past their startup stage. If they get an early contract, they can use that contract and go to a bank and finance their project. It's not a subsidy. It's not like a direct government grant, but the government says, I will buy the service of yours. And once you provide the service to me, I will pay you for it. But this is enough to stimulate a lot of activity and to get money into the sector by just showing that there is a demand for the service. And I think that's something the European Union could really do, and that would make the whole market a lot more competitive.
Marvelous. I'm going to have to wrap it up there, actually, and go back to Dan if he's still there, because we are supposed to be going for our lunch break quite soon. Dan, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Please give us your thoughts there from the JRC.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you to the distinguished speakers. Very interesting. So I took 3 points from this discussion. So the first one is about the fact that we need to speak also about services, not only infrastructure, and we need to speak about the end users. Very important. I think it's a critical element, and resilience should be also seen from this perspective of the end user. Security also, convergence and interoperability, but also affordability. Somebody was saying about the commercial available of the solution. The second point that I will mention is about this whole ecosystem of space, of enterprises, companies, small, big, inside Europe, outside Europe, that need to be stimulating and developed, and to inject competition and also research and innovation. It's extremely important. And the third point, and this is the most important, the most difficult one, is about the strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty. It's about this open. What open means? If you ask 10 people, you will have 10 different answers. And I think that this cannot be discussed outside the society values. It's not only a technological issue, but also it's more, it's going beyond the technology. And in my view, open means open enough to leave room for competition and innovation, meaning smaller companies from Europe, but maybe also other companies from outside Europe. But at the same time, to be closed enough to not jeopardize the EU capacity to make critical decisions. And critical decisions, these are different aspects linked to the values of society. For a democratic society, critical decisions means something. For a dictatorship, critical decision means to control the population. This is critical, and you need to act accordingly. So, in order to address this, there are, as I mentioned, two options. One is pure technological, and was mentioned here by the colleague from Amazon, the redundancy, creating this parallel system that can take over if there is a problem. But also the other solution is a political one, should be based on reciprocity, on values, on the partnership and maybe commercial agreements. But each of them has a cost. Strategic autonomy has a cost. If we speak about technology options, means financial cost. If we speak about agreement and partnership, means a political cost and assuming a risk. So to conclude, the ideal solution for the open strategic autonomy should be a combination of both. And I think that this is something that needs further reflection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan Gendrejean from the JRC. Thank you for joining us. Also, thank you to Massimiliano Salini, MEP, for his message earlier on. And thanks very much to our panelists. Koen Willems from ST Engineering, iDirect, Jean-Hubert Lenot from Eutelsat, Severin Meister from Rivada Space Networks, and Johan Bernard from Amazon. Thank you.